Democrats may not always agree on every detail of the best way to bring about each and every one of these changes. But we do agree that they're needed. And that only happens if we win this election. Because one thing everybody has learned by now is that the Republicans occupying the White House and running the U.S. Senate are not interested in progress. They're interested in power. They've shown themselves willing to kick millions off their health insurance and eliminate pre-existing condition protections for millions more, even in the middle of this public health crisis, even as they're willing to spend $1 trillion on tax cuts for the wealthy. They've given polluters unlimited power to poison our air and our water and denied the science of climate change, just as they denied the science of pandemics. Repeatedly, they've disregarded American principles of rule of law and voting rights and transparency, basic norms that previous administrations observed regardless of party, principles that are the bedrock of our democracy. So our country's future hangs on this election, and it won't be easy. The other side has a massive war chest. The other side has a propaganda network with little regard for the truth. On the other hand, pandemics have a way of cutting through a lot of noise and spin to remind us of what is real and what is important. This crisis has reminded us that government matters. It's reminded us that good government matters, that facts and science matter, that the rule of law matters, that having leaders who are informed and honest and seek to bring people together rather than drive them apart, those kind of leaders matter. In other words, elections matter.
Well, thank you to my opening act, a little excerpt from former President Barack Obama's endorsement video of his former Vice President, Joe Biden. I'm Pete Dominick. This is Stand Up. Shall we? Hey, guys, welcome to episode 84, and welcome to your Wednesday if you're listening on the day that this drops. I know people don't always listen to the podcast on the day that it drops. I appreciate you checking it out. Every day I'm going to be talking with experts on the issues that matter, pretty much everything looking through the lens of a pandemic, all of our lives so deeply affected by what is happening across the planet right now. And I'll be talking to both experts and you, the people who are subscribers to this show, first and foremost. And yesterday I called up my friend Karen Madison, my new friend, who I've gotten to know a little bit, because I wanted to get a perspective from a woman who is single, who is living alone, and that's her situation. And we had a great conversation. That is coming up. Also reached out to my old friend Bruce Bartlett, who is certainly refers to himself as a former Republican, now an independent. He's written several books. He's advised several politicians on issues generally about economics, but he can talk about race, he can talk about politics, he can talk about media. Bruce Bartlett, always great. Had a great conversation with him. And I also just want to thank all of the new paid subscribers that have joined up. In the last couple of days, I think I've had about 15 new people, and I want to go through and thank everybody individually, but I'd always be leaving people out. Rest assured, I see them coming in. I'm trying to reach out to everybody and thanking all of you for supporting this podcast. I have heard so many wonderful things from people that are so happy that I've now been doing it daily. I worry a lot about the quality versus the quantity, but I honestly don't think my quality of the show is suffering. I'm putting so much work into it, trying to find great guests and host great conversations that you can connect with and learn from, be enlightened by, and feel heard. Because a lot of you I'm actually talking to, reaching out to several people this week who've lost their jobs because of this or before, to talk about how to work together to get through that and how to understand the coping mechanisms and dealing with it all. So we're a team, we're a community, And I can't do it without your support, so please consider a subscription on Patreon at patreon.com/Pete Dominick. And thank you again to all of the new subscribers, well over 500 now and growing each and every day. All right, let's get to my first guest. Joining me today, a guy who was one of your all-time favorites at SiriusXM. People loved when Bruce Bartlett joined the program. Most of you did. Some people didn't like how mean he was to Republicans and didn't think it was fair, that he was fair. But I love Bruce Bartlett. Most of you do. He is a former White House Treasury and congressional economist. He's also a former Republican, which is why he has so much credibility when he criticizes conservative Republicans. He's the author of several books, including The Truth Matters, A Citizen's Guide to Separating Facts from Lies and Stopping Fake News in Its Tracks. That book, by the way, is $5 on Amazon. I highly recommend it. We talk about that in this conversation and much, much more. Here it is right now on Twitter at Bruce Bartlett, the man, finally joining Stand Up.
Hello?
Bartlett!
How you doing?
How are you doing?
Actually, remarkably well. I'm a misanthrope, so I've been social distancing my whole life.
Have you really?
Yeah, I mean, my life has hardly changed at all because all I do all day is just sit in front of my computer and, post nasty comments on Twitter, and that's about it. So, and, being retired, my income hasn't been affected. The liquor stores are still open. Pretty much business as usual.
What are you drinking?
I've been drinking rum lately.
Really? How?
Yeah. Well, I for various reasons, I can't drink wine or beer anymore. So I've kind of late in life gotten more into hard liquor. And so I've been drinking. I've always drunk scotch and bourbon and things like that. But for some reason, I never drank rum except as a mixer, right? And I only fairly recently discovered that you can drink it straight if you drink good quality. And luckily, and I was down in the Caribbean in February. Luckily, we got in and out on a cruise before the shit hit.
Wow.
And I got a chance to sample some of the local stuff. Mm-hmm. And so it's just, my hobby for the time being.
I've got to try it now. You're inspiring me. It feels like it's too sweet alone.
No, I don't think so. I mean, you need to drink the dark stuff that's aged. I think, as I was just reading something about this today, it says that as the longer you age rum, the more it starts to taste like whiskey. And I think there's some truth in that. I've got some rums that you if you were blindfolded, you might think you were drinking bourbon.
That's interesting. I've never heard that, but I don't know much about liquor. I pressed record before you even picked up the phone. Is there anything that you said that I can't use? Because I love to ease into conversations.
No, quite all right.
So great to hear your voice, pal.
Yeah, you too.
Been a long time.
Hoping your post-radio career is working out okay.
It's actually surprisingly, I say that not because I don't have faith in myself or the universe, but media is so saturated. There's so many things that you can listen to and learn from and enjoy. And so I'm really surprisingly, to some extent, satisfied, really happy that people keep signing up with paid subscriptions. Every day I get, an email that this many, people have subscribed with a paid subscription on Patreon. And it's super heartening and inspiring because I really don't want to get out of this business. I like doing this. I like calling people like you and asking them questions. I love that. And if there's a way for me to earn a living doing that, I want to try to do it. So far,
well, good luck.
Thank you. I'll need all the luck I can take. And subscribers. So if you're listening, subscribe.
You still doing stand-up?
Well, if there were any gigs.
Right, of course.
All live performance is completely dead, and it's a really interesting question to talk about when and how it will return, including sports, I think. What do you think?
Right. I really miss the March Madness, and I wish we hadn't had to do that.
You don't think it was irrational that they did that? That's not what you're saying.
No. I'm just saying I always look forward to this time of year to see the basketball, college basketball championships, and I don't really care that much about baseball, so I don't care for the rest until football season starts, and then I'm going to be a little bit concerned.
You want to burn an American flag while we're at it? You don't care about baseball? Good heavens, sir! Wow.
Well, I have to say, the Nationals' run last year got me more interested in them than I've been since they, moved to Washington. And, maybe I'd be watching them if I could, but since I can't, it's a moot issue.
So I have a billion things to talk about with you, including your excellent piece that was published in the USA Today. Very impressive, sir. But I just wanted to kind of, because I haven't talked with you, and you wrote this great book that I've relied upon a lot called The Truth Matters by Bruce Bartlett. It's a citizen's guide to separating facts from lies and stopping fake news in its tracks. So how much of what you warned there have you seen, unfortunately, happen, and how much of it have we been able to fight? Well,
I wrote that book in early 2017, and very early in the Trump era, and it was already pretty obvious that a great deal of untruths and lies and misstatements and things of that sort were circulating, without impediment, and people were believing things that were simply wrong, that were lies. And I was trying to give people the tools with which they can separate truth from fiction and better educate themselves and things of that sort. But since then, things have just gotten so much worse. Every single day, Trump tells a couple of dozen lies, and the media simply report it, say, Trump said this, and that's it. They don't interject. They seem to cower in fear of him at these so-called press conferences, which are really just campaign rallies. And I don't understand why the media is so averse to doing its job properly. And I think it can only be explained by the incredible economic pressure that the media is under, and they're just afraid of doing anything other than what they've been doing. But you'd think that this would give them an opportunity to experiment and try other possibilities, because I really think that the failure of the media to hold Trump's feet to the fire and do a proper investigative job is a good part of the reason why they're losing subscribers and losing viewers and therefore losing money. So it's kind of a circular problem, and somebody's got to break out of it. And I see no one in a position of leadership trying to do anything other than just continue to do the same old and continue to hemorrhage money.
Well, you said the media like 3 times, and you mentioned, I think it diagnosed the problem with that media accurately, in my opinion, in terms of the profit motives and the economic issues that were. But I think it's really helpful, if you're going to talk about that, to discuss exactly who you mean, because I think we're generally, when I hear you say the media, I think you're talking about the major newspapers and the cable.
Yeah, the mainstream media, the major media.
Or however you define that. But you also mentioned they're losing subscribers, and that's why, we started talking about my model. And I think I want to believe that independent media is taking those subscribers. People aren't just giving up on getting enlightened and getting information. And I think that's probably a pretty good thing, except for now independent media is so fragmented and so biased. I worry about, where people are getting their information. So be more specific on who you're talking about and what some of the options might be.
Well, I certainly think it's a good idea to have new media, independent media, growing. The problem is that there is a crying need for reporters to just do reporting. Somebody has to go out into the hinterland. Somebody has to go and talk to people and write down what they say and do investigative projects that might take months to complete. And the media today doesn't have the resources to do as much of that as it used to. So the raw material, the raw data that makes the media, including the independent parts, function, the very foundation is crumbling. And what we have so much of, unfortunately, is just chattering. People talking back and forth to each other without any grounding in necessarily truth or reality or facts. And that was one of the reasons I wrote my book. I wanted to, for example, teach people where to go to find statistical data, for example, or economic data that is reliable and trustworthy, rather than just listening to Rush Limbaugh say, the economy's never been better in the history of mankind. And you can look up and see the GDP growth rate and see, well, no, it's not. It's worse than it was during Obama and things of this sort. So, but that requires work. It's a lot of trouble.
And it requires, I'm sorry, go ahead. It
requires effort and it requires money. People are reluctant to pay for a newspaper subscription anymore, and they rely very heavily on what's free. And unfortunately, it's the case that the right has done a very, very good job of setting up a huge network of media outlets that never cost anything. You never have to pay, except for like the Wall Street Journal. You never have to pay to get right-wing media, but progressive media is you often have to subscribe, and people can't afford to do that. So it's a real imbalance, unfortunately.
Well, I'm so glad I pressed you on that point to be more specific of what you're talking about. And you do write about it in the book. The Truth Matters, a Citizen's Guide to Separating Facts from Lies and Stopping Fake News in Its Tracks, because you mentioned reporters, and you've got to pay them, and you've got to have local reporters, and you've got to have reporters, focused on local issues and local corruption and companies and business. You got to have somebody reporting, or many people reporting at the State House about what laws are being passed, or going to town board meetings and so on. But the other thing that you have to have is editors, and people don't quite realize how it all works. So the reporter goes out and does his or her job, and he comes back and he submits the story to an editor, and the editor, makes sure that the story is as accurate as it can be and has the right sourcing. And all of that is what a newspaper traditionally did in what might be referred to as the golden age of journalism in the United States of America, whenever that was.
Well, I think there was a bit of a golden age. I'm not sure precisely when it began. During World War II, I would think. If you go back to the old yellow journalism days of Hearst and Pulitzer, when they were competing with each other to start wars and things like that, it was a bad time. But I think there was a period from World War II up until 10 or 15 years ago when, there was a lot of professionalism in the media, and it did its job pretty well. But so many newspapers have closed and so many reporters have been laid off. I read the other day that the Cleveland Plain Dealer, historically a major Midwestern newspaper, has only 4 reporters left on its entire staff.
Yeah, I saw that.
4 reporters. That's just criminal. And like you say, a lot of what really needs to be done at the state and local level. Somebody has to go to those city council meetings and sit there hour after hour and take notes and be aware when they try to pull a fast one at 1 a.m. when nobody else is there except the reporter. And so
give a contract to their friend, and the paving contract to their friend, and how would we know that? How would we know that if someone wasn't reporting on it? And that's how corruption is bred, because no one's paying attention and reporting on it.
Well, that's right. And I think of some of the major issues that I've been aware of during my lifetime, such as the fight for civil rights, the fight against the Vietnam War and Watergate and things like that. And the reason those events ended the way they did is because the media took a side. I mean, nobody during the civil rights era thought that you should balance a pro-discrimination or an anti-discrimination column with a pro-discrimination column. That would be ridiculous. So there was an overwhelming desire on the part of the media to help bring about civil rights. And I think people respond positively to that. They want the media to not be just objective or even-handed. They want to be told, to a certain extent, what they should think about these things. And the media seems to be afraid to do that. What you get so much of today is he said, she said journalism, where the reporter says, Trump said this, Joe Biden said that, and that's it. That's all. It's up to you to figure out which one is telling the truth. Instead, I think what people want is for the reporter to say, okay, I've now looked into this. I've decided Trump is telling a total lie, and what Joe is saying is pretty much the truth. They want you to use your journalistic skills to decide what's right and what's wrong, rather than just being a stenographer who just writes what people say and doesn't interject in any way whatsoever. Okay. And go ahead.
A really good example of that, stenography in a way, is what is happening with these daily press conferences, where the cable news networks go live on them, which act as, in effect, stenographers. Yesterday, CNN put up some pretty harsh captions saying, the president was performing propaganda, I think one of them said, because he showed a video from Hannity and so on. What do you think of the networks carrying these coronavirus press conferences live? How should they be handling them? And if they do carry them live and caption it as propaganda, aren't they, CNN in this case, committing the act of sharing that propaganda?
Well, yes. I don't know why they feel compelled to run these things live. Maybe the way to do it is to simply run excerpts, and after they're finished, and allow the reporter, the journalist, to interject and say, Trump is telling a lie or a fabrication or something like that. But clearly, there are new techniques that need to be used to deal with a president who is a chronic liar. Who I remember when LBJ was president, and the media came down on him very, very hard for having what they called a credibility gap. There was a divergence between his happy talk about how well the war was going and the reality on the ground that they knew from having reporters embedded with the troops who could see for their own eyes what was going on. Right. And this was considered scandalous. But for some reason, Trump can tell, the biggest whoppers in the world, and nobody seems to mind very much. They may say, yeah, that's bad, but it's not like they turn off the TV.
So I'm glad that we're talking about media, and I hope that people will pick up Bruce's book. The Truth Matters, really, really good. So let's talk about the way that this pandemic is specifically being reported. What do you like about the way journalists and media outlets are handling this situation, much less, we can talk about politicians as well.
Well, I think it's hard to say, because such a big part of the problem with the virus is a lack of good data. And one reason we have very poor data is because Trump and the administration have done an abominably poor job of collecting data because they refuse to do testing. They have refused to provide the places where people can get tested, even though Trump said this would all be available, to anybody, over a month ago. And we're still not doing anywhere near as much testing as we should. People are dying and not being recorded as having been killed by the virus. It's just a tremendous problem that isn't getting better. But you can look to countries like Germany, where they've done a competent job and are doing something that we desperately need to do, which is random testing. You don't just test the people who think that they might be sick. You have to test people who don't know that they're sick so that you can get good data on the incidence of the virus throughout the community. Well, that kind of information is absolutely desperately needed, and the media can't provide it. They can only report what they've got.
Well, this leads me right into another question I wanted to ask you, which is why I asked you the question about the reporting on the virus and what you've seen, because you have a chapter in your book called Trusting Academic Sources, and another chapter, Numbers Must Be Put into Context. One of the biggest problems, I think, in America, and I don't know quite how to understand this, and a lot has been written about it, and I just I'm not that familiar with it, but this lack of trust, this lack of faith in experts and institutions, something I've always tried to combat with my show by inviting experts on and not just blathering about shit I don't know about for more than a minute or two. And why do you think there's been a lack of trust or a deterioration of support for academic resources, for experts, for institutions? Is there anything that, set of events or causes that you would attribute to why that has happened?
Well, I think there's lots of reasons. Certainly one of them is the people on the right side of the political spectrum have viewed academics and intellectuals as their enemies forever. I mean, you can go back decades to Joe McCarthy, who made a special point of going after academics. And that's because they understand that a well-informed, intelligent, well-educated population is not very likely to, vote for Donald Trump or believe the simplistic, stupid ideas that one hears on Fox News and things of that sort. So it's been in their policy to denigrate academia, scholarship, education. You look at states that have had red governors for, one of the first things they do is they go in there and slash the budgets of the state universities. And some of our greatest state universities, like the University of Wisconsin, the University of North Carolina, have been horribly decimated by cutbacks in funding. And this is all very intentional. They also denigrate anything that doesn't involve commercial skills. They don't want people studying literature or philosophy because this teaches them to think. What they want is people who are just drones, just robots. I want somebody who's an accountant. I want somebody who's an engineer whose only job is to make stuff cheap so I can buy it. And a lot of this has to do with, you go back to the southern states after the Civil War. They didn't allow black people into the state universities. They created all special trade schools for black students, where the only thing they learned were, mechanical skills, how to, be a mechanic or a cook or something like that, some skill that white people could use. And I think a lot of this mentality carries over to the current day because the red states of the South are the core of the Republican Party's base. And a lot of their thinking that dates back to, you can go back to George Wallace's campaign in 1968, and it sounds like Trump. It's the same thing. Nothing has changed very much, except how they found some northern guy from New York City to spout their nonsense is a question I'd really love to know the answer to.
Well, I don't think they found him. I think he found them. You know?
Well, that's an interesting question. I'm not really sure what the answer is.
I mean, Trump saw.
I think to a certain extent, Trump was an empty vessel, and the right-wingers got to him first and filled his head with nonsense. If you go back to the campaign in 2016, he didn't sound that bad. I mean, he sounded bad, but not nearly as bad as he turned out to be. In fact, I have a whole file of various, progressive ideas that he spouted during the campaign that he completely abandoned the day he took office. I would really love to see a biographer get into the nitty gritty of exactly how he went from being a rather ordinary, ill-informed, uneducated boob to, the most right-wing authoritarian president in American history and one of the worst in world history.
Well, he was always an authoritarian. His dad was an authoritarian, and he ran his business like an authoritarian. He was always a racist. His dad was a racist, and he
that's true.
was a racist. But furthermore, it's you pose it as if he was at one point not this, hardcore right-wing Republican conservative. And that may be true, Bruce. But I think more than anything else, that I'd love to hear your commentary on is he has always been morally bankrupt and completely corrupt in the way that he thinks. And the right, especially the religious right, has always positioned itself as kind of the moral leaders. And so the idea that he has somehow gotten the support of right-wing Christians, what does that say to you about him or them?
Well, I think it says mostly more about them that they don't believe a word of what they say. But as you were talking, I was thinking to myself, well, it is true that Roy Cohn was his principal lawyer, and Roy Cohn, of course, was Joe McCarthy's right-hand man, and Roger Stone was Trump's top political operator dating back several decades. So there's certainly a history there. It's just that during the days when I was, more active in the conservative movement, I just don't remember Trump as being one of those people that you ever heard about as being, somebody to, even go after for contributions or something like that. Maybe he was just in a little corner that was different, off by itself. I don't know. But that's really what I was thinking about when I said that.
So let's talk about your piece in the USA Today. And I wondered if you agreed with the headline. And then I read your piece and said, yep, no, he does. Because the headline for your op-ed is ex-Republican on Trump coronavirus failures. Our lives depend on electing Joe Biden. You being, of course, the ex-Republican, Bruce, quickly, how do you refer to yourself politically these days?
Well, I'm an independent. I still have some conservative attitudes and some that are extremely progressive. But I don't really feel at home in the Democratic Party for various reasons. And the point I was simply trying to make, because, of course, Bernie withdrew his candidacy last week and endorsed Joe Biden. And the point I was just trying to make to anybody who's still sitting on the fence, who is still potentially winnable to voting against Trump, is your life is at stake. This isn't an issue about, do we have Medicare for all, or do we just lower the age to qualify for Medicare, or some, relatively arcane policy issue. It's literally a question of life and death. We have to get Trump out of office, and we could replace him with any random person, drawn by lot, and we'd be better off. We'd be better off if Hillary Clinton was president. We'd be better off if any of the Republicans that Trump beat. John Kasich would certainly be better. Jeb Bush, any number of people, I think, would in this crisis.
George Bush was terrified of a pandemic. He talked about it. He put a lot of resources. I just learned this on it.
Yes, that's quite correct. I mean, Bush was a bad dude in a lot of ways, and one of the reasons. And I wrote a whole book about what an idiot he was. And I never imagined in a million years we could have a president who had 50 fewer IQ points than Bush had. But that's what we've got. We've got a guy who is a borderline moron, who doesn't have an IQ that is even room temperature. He doesn't have the ability to understand the simplest concepts. He doesn't know, for example, that you can't kill a virus with an antibiotic. He doesn't know this. He doesn't understand how the government operates after having been president for 3.5 years. He still confuses all kinds of concepts about what his powers are, what the Congress does, all kinds of things. It's absolutely incredible.
That book, Imposter, How George W. Bush Bankrupted America and Betrayed the Reagan Legacy. Talk about that.
Yeah. Well, but I feel kind of stupid for thinking that George Bush was so bad when I'd trade him for Trump in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I actually agree with that, and you're not alone in feeling that way. So the coronavirus, I mean, you really are juxtaposing this idea that Trump is so much more dangerous and people are dying as a result of his, I would call it, lack of leadership, and that's what you're writing about, versus Joe Biden. And anybody who doesn't realize that is what? Not paying attention, ignorant, doesn't understand?
I don't think they understand what's at stake. They don't understand that their lives are at stake. I mean, the way I think about this is, I'm obviously not going to attribute every person who dies to Trump. The virus was going to be there no matter who the president was, but I think it could have been mitigated to a much greater extent. And I look at a country like, for example, Germany, where they have a trained scientist as their chancellor, and they have half the virus death rate that we have.
And look what they're doing with the economy as well. Like they're
doing a lot better. They're opening things up. Yeah,
well, they've frozen. They're keeping people employed. The government is spending so much money. I didn't mean to get you off their public health policies, but their economic policies in Germany are also really, really generous, I guess is the word.
Yes, that's true. But the key is that they controlled the virus to a much greater extent than we did. They didn't have a president who completely ignored it for the first 6 weeks or so that it was growing in intensity. And so I think at the end of the day, we will be able to look at, the death rate in Germany and say, okay, about 1.5% of their population who were infected died. In this country, it's about 3%. So we can say, half of all the deaths attributable to the virus are due to Trump's incompetence and stupidity and arrogance and corruption. And he never stops. I mean, every single day he's trying to think of ways to enrich his pals, to enrich his son-in-law and daughter, and promoting quack cures that don't work. It's just absolutely incredible that people aren't marching in the streets for fear of their lives.
I think there's something
to get this idiot out.
There's something else at play, and there's been a lot of reporting on it as well, that I don't know. I wonder if other politicians ever said, listen, don't tell me any bad news. I don't want to hear it. And if you have bad news, wrap it up in a bow and present it. Because he doesn't want to. I think a lot of it is not necessarily just, I don't know how you would, it's strategic. It's that he doesn't actually want to believe the truth about things like climate change or how this virus is acting. He doesn't want to hear it. He doesn't want to deal with it. He doesn't want to hear bad economic numbers. Don't tell me that stuff. From what I hear, the reporting says all of his advisors are terrified to deliver him anything that might, hurt his public profile, his approval ratings, his potential to be reelected. And I don't know, I think that's pretty unique for a leader to say, don't, share any bad news, or, they have to frame it in a certain way so that he doesn't flip out and deny it. And he's denying the problem, it would seem, Bruce, here in many ways. Well,
I mean, I've worked for a number of politicians, and every one of them has at one time or another gotten a dumb idea into their heads that they had to be talked out of. And the way I used to do it is you gang up on him. You get a bunch of advisors, and you literally surround his desk, and you all beat up on him simultaneously.
Do you have an example?
No, I don't want to give you any examples.
Oh, man. Well, without saying a name.
But the point I'm trying to get at is that Trump couldn't get away with this unless he had enablers on his staff who are pandering to him and telling him what he wants to hear. If all of his advisors spoke with one voice and were unanimous and said, you've got to do this or else, then I think things would be better. It's precisely because he has these enablers on his staff who tell him what he wants to hear that he continues to do this. So I do blame the staff to a certain extent, although obviously Trump has, he's an incredibly bad manager, among other things. And look at all the staff people he's gone through, chiefs of staff. I mean, what's his name? The last guy, Mulvaney, he found out he was fired by reading a tweet. In fact, and he never even was named chief of staff. He was the acting chief of staff the whole time he was chief of staff. I mean, every other president in history has had a chief of staff who kept the trains running and made sure stuff got done and made sure that the president was made aware of important facts that he needed to know. And Trump just seems to dispense with all of that.
Well,
and why people aren't just appalled at this appalls me.
Well, that's a cult thing, right? It's not a politics thing. It's not a policy thing. It's just whatever he says about anything is what people believe. He's their source of news, and he's their source of truth and morality, I guess. I mean, it's not like anything we've seen here. Of course, it's very similar to, I think, authoritarians in other countries currently and in the past, wouldn't you say?
Yes, but I think that we also have to explain why people who know better don't react differently than they do. And I think a lot of it is just futility. You just know it doesn't matter. That no matter what you say, no matter what you do, nothing matters. That Trump is just going to be Trump no matter what. And I don't know how to argue against that. I wish I could. But that's one reason why I feel like this election is so important.
Right. And
why people have to understand that, look, we're not voting for Joe Biden because he's the best we had available. Personally, I supported Elizabeth Warren.
Nice.
We're not supporting, Biden because he's going to be a great president. We're grabbing onto him because he's the life raft, and we're going to drown. And maybe it's a rickety life raft, and maybe it's sinking into the ocean.
And it might grab you back
and
caress your neck.
Yeah, but I mean, grabbing onto Trump is grabbing onto an anvil that's going to sink you to the bottom of the ocean. I mean, I can't think of a really good analogy here. I don't want to dump on Biden.
I think you did. I think that was a perfect analogy. I can't think of a better analogy than the raft and the anvil of which you want to grab onto. A rickety raft with a lot of holes. It's really old. It's got some real problems. It's not going to, keep you afloat for very long, but it's way better to hold on to than a weight and an anvil. And so let me have you make the argument about, I woke up this morning to Twitter argument between this reporter, Mehdi Hassan, journalist, opinion journalist, and this young YouTube Bernie bro progressive called, his name is Kyle Kalinske. He's got a huge following. Does a YouTube show, Bruce. And basically the argument there was this kid, Kalinske, was basically arguing that he's not going to vote at all. He doesn't want to vote for somebody who is not, support what he believes. He's a Bernie guy. And what would you say to these people? I've made a lot of arguments here. I want to hear yours, who make these kind of arguments that either they are the same, Joe Biden and Donald Trump are two, birds of the same feather, or that, Biden is not going to give me what I want. He does not represent my values. What do you say to them?
Well, I was trying to address those people in my article. I was trying to say, look, it's a matter of life and death. We're not screwing around here. And I used the analogy of the America First Committee, which existed before World War II, and said, we should not get involved in the war and that sort of thing. And on December 8, 1941, the committee disbanded. They said, we still think we were right, but that issue, it's over. It's done with. We now must win the war. And I feel like that's what we should be doing. All people, who consider themselves Democrats, voted in Democratic primaries, consider themselves progressives in any way whatsoever, we got to pull together to do one thing and one thing only, and that is to defeat Donald Trump. He's an existential threat to mankind, to our lives. Literally,
I'm not joking. He was before this with climate change.
But the virus has made it, much more salient and
for sure.
urgent.
Especially
so
for
I'm
likely
saying
Trump supporters who are more likely to be older. It's even more impactful for a lot of likely Trump supporters. This argument that you're making, life and death.
Well, that's right, and I need the people, the Bernie bros, to understand there's only one person on earth who can defeat Donald Trump, and that's Joe Biden. He's not the guy I would have chosen. For various reasons, including I don't think he's the strongest candidate the Democrats could have run. Right. But he's the guy who got the nomination. Okay. And so we just got to suck it up and pull together.
I think that your article is really important for because not only is it accurate, but it's also, from everything that I've read, Bruce, we are not getting out of this anytime soon. And if we do get out of this, however you define that, and get back to some work, 80%, whatever, it's very possible, as we're seeing in other countries, that it comes back. We are not killing this virus, and it could come back around the time of the election, which makes your article so much more important because of the timing of this horrific pandemic and how it may play out, how it will likely play out.
Yeah, I mean, for the time being, I'm hoping for the best. But
sure, I am too.
The scenario you've discussed is certainly a possibility. And here's the thing: I don't understand why Trump's advisors can't explain to him that it's in his own best interest to get this thing over with as quickly as possible. The best thing we can do for the economy is to kill the virus. The idea that there's a trade-off between the virus and the economy, which is the way the Republicans keep trying to portray it.
Yes.
And they're saying we don't want to kill the economy. Well, of course we don't, but we have to kill the virus first. It's the essential precondition for economic recovery and expansion. So there's really no trade-off. We have to do what we have to do about the virus if we want to have a prosperous economy.
You spent a lot of your career debunking a lot of these conservative economic policies like trickle-down economics and tax cuts for the rich, but this is a new idea that we've got to get people back to work before we get a handle on this virus, because it's a straw man. It wouldn't work. it won't work.
It's the cart before the horse. It's
Yes.
the cart before the horse. Now, the problem is that the people don't want to admit to themselves that we need to have a much, much wider availability of testing. We need to have protective gear available to everybody who needs it, especially healthcare professionals, but ordinary people as well. And we need to do tracing to find out where people who get the disease are getting it from, put those people in isolation, use well-developed techniques of epidemiology to control the spread of the virus, and we need to get a vaccine and a cure. Now, all of that I think will happen, but it may take a year and a half, 2 years. I don't know. I don't know that anybody knows. But unfortunately, people recoil at the thought of remaining in this kind of limbo of lockdown or whatever, social distancing or whatever you call it, for that length of time. They're not going to do it, and they won't do it, but somehow or other we need to keep this under control, and that requires leadership, and we have no leadership. We have an idiot in the White House who doesn't have a clue as to what he's doing. And, I wish Boris Johnson would give him a call and tell him he doesn't know what he's talking about. But unfortunately, that sort of thing doesn't seem to be happening.
Well, I love that you think that would be effective.
Well, one can dream, can't one?
I love you, Bruce Bartlett. It is so great to hear your voice. There's almost no one I'd rather hear rant. You've been doing this a long time. You've written a lot of books, a lot of essays, been involved with a lot of studies, and I'm so glad to have you joining me on the podcast. And I have a feeling listeners are going to want to make this regular, so you're going to have to decide how much time you want to commit to it.
Okay. All right.
Bruce Bartlett on Twitter. Thank you, Bruce.
Okay.
Oh, there he is, Bruce Bartlett. That was great. I loved talking to him. I hope you enjoyed that, and let me know if you did. I would have him on every week. I'm trying to figure out which guests people really like to hear from on a regular basis. Obviously, Eric Siegel and Aaron Carroll and Barry Ritholtz, it would seem, are three guests that you really like. But what other women do you like? What other women of color, people of color? I want to have a wide range of guests that join me on a regular basis here. This show has really evolved, and I know it changes every episode in a lot of different ways, and I appreciate you staying with it as I experiment, but I love to hear your feedback. I don't have a producer, I don't have an editor, so let me know what you like and who you like to hear regularly on the program as we all travel through the pandemic together. Speaking of which, I've been reaching out to a lot of listeners of this show because I find that having conversation with listeners, ordinary folks, just living their lives, their pandemic lives, is interesting and helpful. This has been really productive talking to people. Listeners have given me great feedback on these conversations that I'm taping them and throwing them in the podcast. And I really like this woman who I had a long conversation with last night, Karen. Her name is Karen Madison. She's a single woman. She lives, I think, outside Washington, D.C. I'm forgetting, that doesn't really matter. But I called her up last night to get the perspective of someone living alone, and she was great, honest, transparent about her life and what she was dealing with and how she was dealing with it. I think you're really going to like this, and here it is right now. My new friend, Karen Madison. Hey.
Pete.
What's
Karen
up?
Madison. How are you?
You just said your full name and I'm recording.
I know, but, I figured I'd be quasi-professional. Just on the phone until I get, then I'll be myself.
Are you
What's
drinking?
Up? Not anymore.
When did you stop?
I did a virtual happy hour, and I could only drink half of the drink I made for myself.
Why?
I could only get half of it down. I'm kind of a wuss. I've lost my tolerance.
How's that? It's a bad time to lose your tolerance.
I know, but I started to just act old, and
because of this?
Went with that. No. Well,
are you knitting a blanket right now, Karen?
If I knew how to knit, maybe I would, but I can't do that either.
I thought it would be really interesting to have you on the show today because you sent me this email a couple weeks ago, which it just stayed with me, this little detail that when I think about everybody going through this crazy experience right now, there's so many different categories of people. And the one that you're representing and the one that you said, don't forget is, well, this is what you wrote. You wrote, I'm listening to the beginning of your podcast on Monday, March 23rd. You did not ask about the single people. The lack of human contact is taking its toll on me. It's stressing me out. Remind your listeners to FaceTime resume their single friends. So here I am calling you because I didn't forget about that email. And I absolutely have empathy for, and I think about that a lot. People who are,
I appreciate you. That's so sweet.
Well, tell me about it. Like, what's it like? I mean, what do you think is like the difference in that you are living alone outside of your crazy neighbors?
That's a whole nother level of bullshit. But
that's not a single thing. That's like, it'd be nice if you had cool neighbors that you could talk to and stuff. But the idea of being alone in your apartment?
Separate. It's a condo, but it's apartment style. So there's people above, there's somebody below. But for me, it's people, when you tell people that this is hard, I know it's hard for everybody. And especially, if you're a parent and you're having to take on the responsibility of homeschooling your kids, that's absolutely something that you're not used to. So you're adding homeschooling to being responsible for your work responsibilities if you're lucky enough to have a job where you can work from home. So I get that. That's stressful too. But for me, I am an extrovert. When I want to be by myself, I am comfortable with that. But I like the option of being able to go out and see people when I want to. I'm a toucher. I'm a hugger. I like that.
Stay away.
Yeah, with the social distancing, I can't. And I'm stuck in this house and I feel super alone.
Yeah, no, I first of all, I think that I appreciate you and everybody kind of saying, listen, and I've gone through that a lot myself with, my situation isn't worse than other people, or, just simple things like I'm a straight white guy. So, but it doesn't mean that I don't have challenges. And even though you're having empathy for, parents with young kids having to become teachers and work full-time jobs, I appreciate
everybody.
that. But let's just put that in a box and talk about the issue that you're dealing with. Because I talked to Michael Cohen for yesterday's broadcast, and he has his kids, but he said, and I thought this is really interesting, wrote his Boston Globe piece, I'm sure you have some type of agreement with, I haven't touched another adult in over a month.
Right.
We don't have an experiment for that.
Right. And so, for instance, my job just realigned. And so I'm on a new team. So I should probably know the number of people, but I'm on a team of, I think, 10. And we're from 4 different teams. I don't know everyone near as well as I knew the rest of my old team. And one of the newer people said something like, oh, well, I'm just so grateful to have a job. And I was like, well, we're not talking about the gratitude of having our job being protected and being able to work from home and no disruption in our pay. But being home alone has me worried about my mental health. Like, that's separate from the gratitude. Like, I might lose every last bit of my marbles being stuck in the house.
Yeah, talk to me about that. Like, how does that crumble? Like, what are the signs? Are there points? You've been super honest and vulnerable with me off the air, and I admire that, and I try to be that way. I think that's a sign of confidence and
thank you.
And security, and I admire it and I appreciate it, and I think it's really important when people do that, especially publicly, much less privately. And so what are the signs of the deterioration of your mental health? Are there periods of during the day? Are there moments? Are there thoughts? Are there, what is it? How does it manifest for you?
Okay, so what I can say is, for me, I know that I'm pretty high strung, period. So it's always been difficult for me to just let things go and not get worked up about pretty much anything. So it's always been difficult for me, but I've really made a point to work on that. And I have a therapist, so I go see her. No, I don't go. I'm sorry. Skype. I Skype with her on a weekly basis. Mm-hmm. So that's something I've recognized, and I'm willing to admit it.
It's awesome.
And seriously, she is probably the most important appointment that I have on a weekly basis.
Oh, send me her name. I need somebody.
Yeah, everyone needs one. I'm convinced. I also recognize that I have developed more of an anxiety issue since I had a friend commit suicide in October. So I've internalized that because, I'm sorry, there's no handbook for that.
Right.
And even though she wasn't my best friend, she was still a friend, mm-hmm. and it affected me. And watching my friends who were much closer to her really crushed me. So I feel that physically. I feel that when something gets me worked up, I feel my heart rate. I look at my Apple Watch, I see my heart rate go up.
Oh, that's probably not good.
No,
I was doing that too, actually. That's funny you say. I was definitely doing that when I was having the worst of my, I call it the troubles. The troubles time.
When the job changed?
Yeah, back in November and December, and then it went away. Yeah, exactly. And then it went away, and it was I was feeling my heart rate go up, and I would even look at my watch and check in on it. So that's one sign. And you talk about the catalyst of your friend, but what are other, and being that's all really interesting. The fact that you're able to also point to it and talk about it is huge. Most people can't. Don't you think that most people probably don't do the kind of work that, frankly, you and I do on ourselves to understand what the problem is, and therefore they struggle more not knowing what's happening to me? They don't know why they're feeling the way they feel. It doesn't mean we always do, but...
Right. I don't think that everyone takes the time, because it is a lot of people that are like, I don't have the time. I'm not strong enough. I'm not whatever. But I also know that I haven't been happy trying to do it on my own.
That's good.
And going to the therapist, I've been able to peel back some layers. And I've also just seen how carrying some of this dysfunction from childhood to my late 40s is really just fucking me up. Let's be honest.
Yeah, that's, again, probably most people. But the difference between you and most people is you don't acknowledge it. And then if you did acknowledge it, then you don't do the work to try to understand how it's fucking you up. And then you can't get better because you don't recognize the problem. So again, credit to you for identifying it. So how does that, though, again, relate to, those are generalities that we all deal with, right? And how does it kind of get exacerbated or triggered because of this? Is it because
too much time?
Yeah.
I have so much time to sit with all of these things. Yeah. And if we want to just add another layer to that, my hyper self had to deal with when we started this shut-in, I actually had the time to really grieve the loss of a relationship, because I have been able to keep myself so busy with work that I didn't really have time to process.
Someone you were dating?
Yeah, I had been dating this man for 2.5 years.
Mm.
It was dying. It was absolutely dying. But to officially like sit down, have the time to sit there and process that, like, we're done, was tough, because in the first week we didn't really have the provisions and the setup to work from home. And then I had also just gotten feedback from an interview, my second interview at my company for a second job, which I didn't get. And I didn't get robust feedback. So they were like, "Oh my God, Karen, you're great." But I was like, "Oh, the feedback you're giving me is like, you were just so great, but it was like so close." But I was like, there's some reason I didn't get the job. So what aren't you telling me?
So you had the demise of a 2.5 year relationship, and you didn't get the job opportunity you wanted, and then you had all of this time to sit on it and think about it and be in it, and that is hard.
Yeah. So it was like I had my own shit on top of this craziness, which we weren't getting the truth. And the last places I had traveled were 2 trips to Boston. And we know that was a place where coronavirus had popped.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sorry, but that person in the White House, like, we weren't getting the truth.
Do not say his name.
Yeah, we weren't getting the truth. So I'm not super paranoid, but I didn't know anything.
So you didn't know anything. You were thinking you also might have been exposed as a third thing now.
Yeah, and I was like, oh my God, I was here.
Mm-hmm.
This was happening. I just saw my friend's parents a few days after I got back from Boston.
Yeah, catastrophizing.
Did I expose them? And like, if it was just me, I would just wait and see. But did I get them ill? They're older. I would never forgive myself. Like, so then that's when I lose control of not being so hyper and high strung, and it just all goes to the wayside. And then here I am, an absolute freak show.
Dude, when I just got to say, I'm sorry, but when you talk about your pain, you do it in such an honest way. It makes me laugh.
We can laugh now because I'm like out of that.
But I mean, I don't mean to laugh at your pain, but pain is funny.
Let's laugh about it, because
calling
you know
yourself
what?
A freak show is fun. So,
but it's true.
What else? But like, what are some other things that maybe those of us that are, with our families, with our kids, with other people, might take it for granted or might not understand about living alone, being single during this insanely strange period?
It's just you just got to give people some grace and not make the comparisons. Before we got on the phone, a little earlier, I was started listening to the most recent podcast from, what's her name? Nora McInerney.
Don't know who she is.
Have you heard her?
I don't think so.
Okay, so she is this woman who has this incredible story. Her first TED Talk went viral. She is a woman who suffered like a grotesque amount of loss in a short period of time. Mm-hmm. She lost a baby. She miscarried, lost her father, and
her husband.
Her husband.
I'm looking at it, yeah. American author, writes about dealing with grief and loss.
Yeah.
Drawing on her personal experiences, miscarrying a child, losing both her father and husband to cancer within several weeks. Good.
Yes.
God.
And so she came to my company and did her talk, and like out of somebody who suffered, and she could really come back from that and really tell the story about how people would ask you that awful question, how are you doing? And it's the worst question when you're suffering, right? But looking at it from a different perspective, it's like, that's a question that's terrible, but from a well-meaning person that really wants to help you, they might not have the words for the right question. And how can you have the right question when someone's gone through that much? They're really trying to help you, but when you respond to them and say, I'm fine, you're blocking the blessing of someone really reaching out because there's no great question and no great answer at that time. But what if you really just said, I'm terrible, thanks for asking? Then you open that door to have somebody help you. And
well,
so,
you're talking to someone who's detests small talk. And when someone says, how are you? I make a very serious effort to give an original answer. And it doesn't necessarily have to be accurate or honest, but I definitely have been more honest since I started struggling. People say, how are you? And a couple times, for sure, to the right people, I was like, honestly, fucking terrible. Really, really struggling. Right.
But for you, even if that person didn't really know how to take it, but for you, didn't that even kind of make you feel a smidge better? Because you weren't really lying.
No,
you're right.
Yeah, because the conversation that I would only answer that to somebody who would be able to respond to it appropriately. And then it turns into a thoughtful conversation usually. And I'm just there spouting my problems.
Exactly. And for some people, they were able to, yes, you were heard. Now, when I tried it on my mother. That was a fucking dumpster fire.
Yeah.
Because she was like, but you sound, yeah, I know. But she was like, but you sound good. And I said, do not ever say that to me.
Huh.
Like, I'm sorry that you can't, I'm giving you the truth because I can't give you another answer. Like, it's going to take me a while to feel somewhat normal because I'm dealing with something that is not anything I expected to be dealing with. Like, my friend did something that's so outside of the playbook. I don't know how to feel.
The suicide.
And it's going to take, yes. And I was like, I don't know how to deal with it. And so I'm getting help, but I could laugh, cry, and have 60 emotions in one sentence. So if you go by my voice, I can sell you a bridge right now because I'm good as a salesperson. So you can't believe how I sound. And if you say that to me, you're going to make me angry because you're not listening to me. You know what I mean? But when I'm able to just say to people like close friends, it makes me feel like I'm not lying. And just like you said, I'm fucking terrible. Like, it opens some people up.
Yep. And I think that's really, I'm really glad that we talked about that. I think it's a really important thing for people to try to do right now is be honest about how you are doing. And because everybody is the most, not wonderful, but interesting thing about this is that it's a shared experience and it crosses everything, gender, ethnicity. Obviously everybody's got a different situation, but everybody is having to socially distance. Everybody is having to alter their life. Everybody is dealing with fear. Even if you're a rich person with all the privilege in the world, you're afraid that someone's going to get within 6 feet of you. And that's common and that's a collective experience. And I don't know what to do with that, and nobody does, but that's why I wanted to call you tonight to get your perspective from the single woman perspective. And I want to just keep doing that with people getting,
Yeah.
Look, retired people, married people, people with young kids, people with, vulnerabilities, people living on the edge financially. I mean, there's just so many different ways of looking at this and dealing with it. And I just want people to be honest as they feel like they can be. And now I don't know, it feels like you're special in that way. And you have this confidence and this vulnerability. I think I do, but not everybody does. But we should try maybe a little harder to hear each other and to be more honest with each other too.
Exactly.
That was a long rant.
Sometimes I love your rants, but sometimes I'm just like, I don't have the energy. Like I look at in my own mind, it's like I have these like pockets of energy, and there's only so much. And if I pull from one, I'm not going to have enough left for the other.
Yes. Bandwidth.
Yes. So for me, I look at how I kind of reset myself for 2020. I had the great opportunity at work to not only do my job, but pick up a special project at work. So I was spread so thin, and I already know I don't really work well from home. I am super short attention span. So I'm all over the place. My time management at home sucks. And so now that I'm forced at home, it's so much worse.
Yes.
It is so much. If you were homeschooling me my mind was transformed into some little kid's body, I would be the kid that's making their parents drink all day. Like, no, I'm horrible, but I will get it done eventually. But no, I'm going to make someone drink. Someone's going to have an alcohol problem. So I'm not great at this, but I will eventually do it because I have to. But it is not, if somebody else were in this house, they're going to go batty too. So maybe there's a reason why I am single right now. Because if somebody was here, it wouldn't work. Someone would kill somebody. So
can't prove a negative, but
yeah, no,
and that's who knows. But you're figuring it out. You are extremely emotionally intelligent, and I can tell. And you're doing work on yourself. You're not avoiding. I mean, there's nothing more. There's nothing more you can ask of yourself. And most people don't do what you're doing. So you should.
No,
I learned something. And I don't mean to condescend to you, and you probably already, have some kind of practice like this, but it's kind of a weird thing. My wife taught me this. She said, you're being very bad to yourself. You're not being compassionate to yourself. You're being judgmental of yourself.
100%.
And it's okay to be critical of yourself and to identify, but like the beating up of yourself.
Super hard on myself.
Yeah,
I totally agree.
So what my wife says, the solution is, just there's a lot of different things, but just having a different conversation, whether it's in your meditation or like some gratefulness, but like literally saying things to yourself that are more compassionate and that are less cruel and judgmental. And I'm still not doing a good job at that, but
Me neither.
I'm trying, and I understand that there's a different way. And she gave that to me, and I'm really working hard on it. I catch myself being a dick to myself.
Right. So
why would anybody want to listen to me?
No, I think you're fine. Maybe this is why when I stumbled upon you on the radio, that I related to you, because I was like, is he my spirit animal? Because
what a flattering idea! It's so great to think that I could be
white man, my spirit animal. I don't understand. It's because I don't know how this works, but I'm just gonna go with it. But
I love it.
I have been working on giving myself grace, and that's I don't do resolutions because those are cheesy to me, and I need to,
because there's a threshold for failure that you can really hold in your
exactly. So
and be like, I didn't do it, or I did it for 2 weeks, or I'm back. It's like now you're back to
done by that's January 1st at 8 a.m. Yeah. Like it doesn't work for me. So this year I tried something different. And what I did this year is I picked a mantra and then I picked 2 words. So my mantra is doing what's best for me so I can be better for myself and the people I love. I found that on Instagram because I was so overextended that I didn't do much that made me happy.
Yes.
I was giving and giving and giving. And by the end of the year, I had nothing. I literally spent my entire vacation in bed because I couldn't give anything to anybody. I was dead.
Yeah, I had a lot of people use that analogy, putting your own mask on first. Take care of yourself so you can take care of others.
Exactly.
Doing what's best for me. That's and what's the other one?
And then my 2 words are perspective and grace. And I make this high standard for myself. And I think it's because I want to not be the people who I feel that disappointed me, that I have this high standard, which is impossible. And when I don't achieve it, I beat myself up. So I make a mistake, and now it's like I've killed puppies in front of like the owners, kindergarten class. The children. The kindergarten class at the school down the street. Like, and that's unreasonable.
No, that's not grace. That's
I forgot essentially my goddaughter's Christmas gift at my house on Christmas Day. She's 17. I bawled my eyes out. My best friend was looking at me like, what the fuck is wrong with you on Christmas Day? She's like, seriously, what is happening? And I was like, I forgot her present. She's like, have you lost your marbles?
Right.
Like, you live 15 minutes away. It's not like you're 3,000 miles away, like a 7-hour plane ride. We can do this. Like, you can come back tomorrow if you want. You got to give yourself some room to grow, to make some mistakes.
Yep.
And not everyone's going to see you as this bastion from hell. Like, you're not Satan because you made a mistake, or you're not Satan because something bad happened to you. Like, Pete, this might be the opportunity of your lifetime because you got laid off.
I want to believe it.
I mean, I've gotten like Pete, my ego is so hurt that I didn't get this 2 jobs that I applied for. I'm like, how could you not hire me? But after I go through my little phase of being pissy, number one, I did nothing in my first interview for none of the people to hire me. Nothing. That would have been a gift and a chance that no one should have made on me. So number one, the first job, never should have ever been considered. Number 2, the second job, I rambled. So if the other person's interview was better, I can see how they got the job and not me. I'm chatty. Look at me. I'm talking your friggin' head off. So give yourself some grace and take the gift of feedback. And while I have some extra time on my hands, get some help and learn how to speak the interview language.
Well, I'm going to end here, but I'm going to thank you for all the gifts that I think you just gave to people in a lot of different ways.
Thank you.
With your honesty and with your vulnerability and with just your practice and your journey that you're on. I think that you are, like, I know you very little, but I was like, who can I call tonight? And that was that itch about the single person thing, and I wanted to talk about that. But I just felt in the few interactions we've had, I was like, there's something about this woman that's very real and honest and raw. And I'm just really impressed with how you're handling it. I know it's, what you listed in terms of what you've gone through and what's happened and the little crumbs you gave us are of great value. And I think that people will hear them and they'll resonate. And I appreciate it that you would do this. It's awesome.
Thanks, Pete.
Yeah.
I don't mind at all. I think you've been very great to me. Just like you said, the small interactions, but I was being truthful in how I've always felt just by being a listener. And even the few emails I've sent to you on your radio show, I always wanted to be able to like call in, but since I was always late to work, I never really had the opportunity to be on hold.
Well, here we are. We did it.
I appreciate you.
Well, you only made one mistake in this conversation.
What?
You said I might be your spirit animal, this white bald guy, and now I'm going to have to hold that over your head, I feel.
No, but there's so many other things. Like sorry to keep dragging on and chatting, but I love it. You talk about you going to college and having a black roommate. And that was like your first close interaction with a black person?
Not
right?
Not my first
like
close interaction,
intimate.
but it was my first. I had mixed race cousins, but I wasn't that close to them. It was my first intimate, close relationship with a person of color for sure.
So I was that person on my campus. So it's like, I'm like, I know him. I get you. I get it. So when you talk about the race thing and college and all that stuff, I was like, we get each other.
Yeah. That you bring it up. Now I'm forced to talk about it, but I will just say this about that experience. The shortest way to talk about it is I was completely radicalized by black people, completely transformed. I was vulnerable to it and open to it and kind of, I never changed. I didn't code switch. I didn't become, I didn't identify or even try to, even with like music,
Right.
To some extent, maybe language, but really not. And that's why I was allowed to stay in because I maintained my genuine self. But they taught me so much that I could just I never had a perspective for about so many things that it radicalized me forever on the issue of race, period.
Yeah.
And it also made me, I think, more curious, interested in, and attracted to people of color or people of, a different ethnicity in general, because I just had so little diversity growing up that I wanted it. And then once I got a taste of it, I was like, it's great. Wow.
Yep.
What is that
You're
lotion?
open-minded.
What does that lotion do? There were so many stereotypes that, I'd heard about black people, and mostly through like media, right? Because I didn't.
Right.
And that's where all the comedy is.
Yeah.
It's like, wait, what?
But I like how you are open and you bring on guests and you talk about it. You talk about those issues and you talk about you're open to the discussion. I don't expect everyone to understand those issues, but if you're open, then what you can do is be someone that helps me and can stick up for me and stick up for the right and the wrong.
I love that. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete.
Talk again soon.
This was awesome.
Good.
Yes, absolutely.
That's Karen Madison, everybody.
Pete Dominic, I appreciate you. Have a great evening.
Nothing has been better for me than making new friends during this time, reaching out to people, getting to know people, hearing their journey and their struggle, and having it resonate with me and mine. Like I've been trying to say, I'm not a therapist. I don't know exactly how to give you advice on how to deal with things, but I do know how to keep a conversation going. I do know how to feel not alone and not isolated at a time when many of us can. And so thank you to Karen and everybody else I've been talking to. I'm going to keep sharing these conversations on lots of my episodes here, which is now daily, every day, Monday through Friday, Haven't missed a day yet for 3 weeks. It's kind of been a soft launch, but I want to just remind you that I can't do it without you and your support on Patreon. So thank you to the over 15 people who have signed up in the last couple days. We're well over 500 in this community of listeners who are like-minded in terms of their curiosity and their passion and their humor and their kindness and their generosity. Amazing folks that are contributing to this program, and I really appreciate it. It allows me to keep doing it each and every day. Stay safe, stay kind, stay curious. I love you. Talk to you tomorrow.